Welcome to BYJU'S IAS and a very warm welcome to our weekly roundup of international events. What we have been trying to point out to you in our recent conversations is that besides the big powers, besides the superpowers, besides the really large great powers historically, there are many countries in different regions which exercise an influence on international affairs which is no less significant than the great power play. The changing equation of power relationship between big powers, the great powers, the erstwhile superpowers, aspiring superpowers are obviously significant. But some countries which have not been recognized as major players in international affairs have in recent past emerged not only as sources of conflict which might escalate beyond control of great powers, which seems to be a case of the tail wagging the dog. These powers draw into their arena of power conflicts, regional conflicts, big powers, from which they find themselves very difficult to extricate. These countries may not figure in the top 10 countries in terms of area or in terms of population, in terms of their resource richness, but their geopolitical situation is such that they exercise an influence in international events which is not negligible, and we should be careful appreciating what role they can play, what role they can constrain others to play in international relations. One such country is Turkey and another such country is Ethiopia. What we intend to do with you is to talk about these two countries, one aspiring to be more than a regional player because it is situated at the junction of three continents, Asia, Europe and Africa. The other is occupying Horn of Africa, a position where it controls the passage of seafaring vessels in Red Sea, its approach towards Suez Canal and the eastern coast of Africa. And also, it may be a poor country, but at the moment it has claims to the waters of Nile which it can control. Its neighbors dispute this claim, but this is referred to as tower of water, and the water security of various countries in Africa depends on what is happening in Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been going through a very unfortunate period of political instability, almost civil war, turmoil. All these things are important. And Turkey seems to have an extremely unusual exceptional knack to get involved with other people's wars and affairs. This is what we intend to discuss with you this time, that how these two countries, disparate but both having historical memories of empires in past and ambitions to play a more important role, more active role in current events. Where do we begin with Turkey? The geography or the history? I think geography is a very good point to start our voyage of understanding of this complex, colorful nation state. It shares its border with 8 countries. It shares its borders with Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bulgaria, Georgia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, and just off its coast is a big island of Cyprus. It doesn't share its land borders with it, but its maritime boundaries clash with this state. So when we look at this, we come across a very interesting situation where all these diverse influences for millennia have flown from north, south, east, west into this crucible which has shaped its historical experience, memories and legacy. The earliest to establish contact or claim control over this territory were the Greeks. As we see the Aegean Sea, that part of the Mediterranean which merges into this has always been providing easy access from Ionian Islands, Greeks, Macedonia, Cyprus to Turkey, which has been a cause of conflict but also a cause of imbibing influences which are cultural. The Greeks claimed it as a part of their empire, then subsequently Romans claimed it. Originally the city which is now called Istanbul, in between was called Constantinople, was known as Byzantium. The memories of Byzantine Empire still continue, but without complicating life, without burdening our mind with history, we have to broadly note 3 historical periods. There was a period of when this area was dominated by Rome. It was part of the Eastern Roman Empire. It was the capital of the Roman Empire for a short while, and the city of Constantinople was founded by Emperor Constantine. It was lost by another emperor called Constantine much later, but in between there had been a place which was a city and a country where the Christianity was a dominant influence. Now, after that, when Muhammad the Victor in 1453 defeated Constantine and claimed the city of Constantinople for the Islamic Empire, the things changed. The Islamic influence became dominant. And although it is fashionable in European historian circles to say that Turkey's decline began soon after Muhammad and his successor Suleiman the Great exited from the scene, and a steady period of decline of Turkey started. But if you look at the Turkish interpretations or the non-Western interpretations of history, Turkey continued to be a major player in European power politics all the way till the Greek War of Independence in the first quarter of the 19th century, which has been, of course, immortalized by Lord Byron's participation in it on the side of the Greeks. But then the Turks, they lost their Greek part of their empire, but still it left with them with a large chunk. They were comparable at this time, early 19th century, in terms of army, in terms of technology, in terms of prestige, with other powers of Europe. But then in the 19th century, somehow or other, the decline certainly set in, and Turkey was identified as the sick man of Europe. So whether it was the Crimean Wars, whether it was throughout the treaty building, alliance building, Turkey was something of a pariah. Now, what happened is that you can't blame contemporary Islamophobia of the West and say that this was because of the orthodoxy of the Islamic sultans and so on. It also was partly the power play of different European colonial powers trying to control Turkey through exercising their influence over the sultan. Partly the problem was that Turkey continued to think in itself as the leader of the Islamic world, which it did not have the wherewithal to sustain. We must not forget that the Khalifa in Istanbul was the one who gave power to various rulers elsewhere in the Islamic world to claim sovereign status almost by giving them a khutbah, to reading power. Now, the problem is this was continuing. The Khalifa in Istanbul was supposed to be the leader of the Islamic world, token symbolically, but effectively it was not in a position to exercise any control as an imperial power beyond its borders. Now, this changed after the First Great War, when Turkey once again emerged on the conference table as an, if not a major actor, but at least a player with a place on the high table when the peace agreement was being signed. This was the time when Muhammad the Sultan was banished, Kemal Atatürk became the leader, emerged out, and he projected Turkey as not an Islamic state, but a secular state, a modern state, more or less a democratic state, with some control on economy of the state, but also the westernized personality of Turkey was emphasized. Islamic practices like wearing turbans, wearing fez caps were banished. Now, this was more or less secularization from top, which was resented by some of the people who believed in orthodox ways, orthodox practices. And of course, India got involved in this because when the Turks were going through a period of turmoil, one Indian nationalist, Dr. Ansari, took a humanitarian medical relief mission to Turkey, and also Mahatma Gandhi supported, on the appeal of Ali brothers, the Khilafat movement, which was to force the British to reconsider abolition of the Khalifa's rule and so on. This did not happen. But this secularization, westernization, modernization has left seeds of conflict till this date. Kemal Atatürk and his successors' rule ended in early 50s. By that time, the Cold War had started, and Turkey had joined the Western alliance against the Soviet Union and the Socialist bloc. Its geopolitical situation made it very important strategically for the Westerners, especially to Americans. It became a member of the NATO. It was, of course, a member of the United Nations before this. It joined various other international organizations. So there is this aspect of the personality of Turkey, westernized ruling elite, masses which were not entirely westernized or pro-Western, a country which did not have ample resources but which could rely after the war on the generosity of the Marshall Plan, and once it joined the NATO alliance, it did not have to worry about its own defenses. It was aspiring to be a full-fledged member of, when European Union was evolving, of that organization. But at the same time, the Western countries, especially the United States, were not particularly worried about democratization or about creeping Islamization in this country, as long as Turkey was a reliable ally. Now, Turkey continues to be a member of NATO. Turkey continues to be reasonably westernized in attire, in idiom, especially in its cities. It is a highly urbanized country. Almost 70%, 75% of its population stays in cities and towns. The agriculture sustains a very small section of the people. The rural areas that are underdeveloped are only in the remote northern and eastern provinces. But all this has left a problem, because when we come to the 1990s, we see a Turkey which is no longer identifying itself with West or democratic West in an unalloyed fashion. Turkey was realizing by 1990s that if it wanted to play an autonomous, independent role in international affairs, it wanted to build up its power, it would have to go back to its imperial past, revive memories of glory, excite the people, energize them with the memories of imperial past of Turkey. And of course, it cannot be denied that it was during the Caliphate in Turkey, when the Islamic empire stretched from the Great Wall of China to Granada and Cordoba in Spain. Although the Turks were nominally heading the Islamic community, it were other invaders which reached. Even the Indians had a period in their medieval history when Turko-Afghan sultans ruled India. Now it is different that those Turks which came to India, established a sultanate here, are very different from modern day Turks. But we shall leave it at that. There's another complex ethnic issue. But Turkey has started changing in 1990s. And this transformation of Turkey also coincided with two currents which conflicted in the nation. One was the role of Islam in politics and society, but a liberal form of Islam, not a fanatical, dogmatic, aggressive form of Islam. This was enunciated by a philosopher, social activist, poet, literature called Gulen. At one time, the present authoritarian leader Erdogan was a follower of this gentleman. Right now, of course, the two have fallen apart. Gulen, who is living in exile for quite some years in United States of America, has been branded as a terrorist. He can't come back to Turkey. He is in exile. His citizenship has been taken away. And Erdogan has been dominating the political scene as an authoritarian ruler, more or less a charismatic ruler, supported by the army. Army has remained loyal to the elected government, although it has taken over power at times, but handed it over back again to a civilian elected government. So there is this cozy relationship between the top army leadership. This changed for a very short while in recent past, in 2016, where there was an attempted coup. This coup was quickly suppressed, and it was not critical for more than a day or 2 days. Erdogan remained unscathed. But going back to Erdogan, Erdogan started his political career as a mayor of Istanbul. And in 2003, he was banned from holding public office for a year for his inflammatory pro-Islamic statements. This is the irony. Then he was under the influence of Gulen, who was a mild, moderate Islamic leader, but the inflammatory speeches which Erdogan made were hardcore, and that's why he was banned from holding public office. But within a year, when the ban was over, there was a by-election. He was elected back again, and his nominee, who was holding office of the prime minister, vacated the place for him and became the president. Now, ever since then, almost for 2 decades, it is Erdogan who has dominated the politics of Turkey. Interestingly, however much the outside world may criticize Erdogan for violation of human rights, for his propensity to take risks, for his tightrope walking, which is particularly dangerous not only for him but for anybody else who engages with him, his opportunism, his capacity to change sides, and of course his adventurism. But all that apart, one cannot deny that under his leadership, his party, AKP, the People's and Development Party, has won elections every time with an enhanced majority. So it is Erdogan who is seen by many analysts in international relations as a person who ushered in the age of elected authoritarian dictatorial leaders. Turkey remains a secular country legally, but the temper is decidedly more Islamic there. Now, we must see the demographic profile of Turkey before we proceed any further. Turkey is a country which a majority of almost 80% of its population, a little over 80, Sunni Muslims. It has 15% or thereabouts of Shia population. There are small percentages, small measures of Christians and others and non-believers and so on. Now, the Shia part of the segment of the population creates some problems because it is sharing a border, as we said, with Iran, which is the largest Shia nation in the world. It also shares a border with Iraq, where the leadership has been Sunni, but the population has a large chunk of Shia population. It shares a border with Syria, where the leadership, Assad, is a Shia, an Alawi, which is not what Turkey likes, but Iran supports him. Now, there are various permutation combinations which have been working in the past few years. Now, what is the relationship between Shia Iran and Sunni Turkey? How has Turkey managed its relationship with Israel, which is perceived as an enemy, life-threatening enemy of the Arabs, especially in the context of the Israelis raising the ante, trying to push the envelope as far as they can, change their capital to Jerusalem, to increase the atrocities on Arabs within the Israeli territory, denying rights to people who are settlers in supposedly the territory which was to be granted to the Palestinian Authority, their retaliatory bombing in Lebanon, in other places, saying that they have been sheltering Hamas, who have been launching attacks on Israel. How has Turkey coped with it? Turkey has criticized Israel very in strong terms, campaigned for international condemnation of Israel, but there has been no direct conflict or an opportunity for a confrontation between these two countries. How Erdogan has managed that is quite miraculous. Similarly, when Iran is supporting militias which are in favor of Assad in Syria, Turkey is on the other side, where it is supporting people who are the militants, insurgents against Assad. Now, what happens is almost the same situation. There is a replay we see in Iraq. Now, how does Turkey manage its contradictions in its relations with Iran, or one could say Iran manages its contradictions with Turkey? One of the important trading partners of Turkey is Iran, which is next door. And Iran and Turkey occasionally have frayed tempers, occasionally have irritants and irritations, but it has not led to, it's the same thing as in Yemen, where the Houthi rebels are supported by Iranians and the Turks are on the other side. Now, the interesting situation is that Turkey is a vitally interested party in whatever changes are taking place in the political map of Middle East, not political map, but the geopolitical map of Middle East. If the Israelis, UAE and Saudis normalize their relationship, where does it leave Turkey? But that is one part of the diplomatic bargaining which Turkey has done successfully. Now, there is another irritant which is between Turkey and its neighbors, that is the small minority of Kurd population. Now, the Kurds are there, which are spread over Iraq, Syria, Iran and Turkey. Now, the Turkey has tried to suppress them and has been alleged of human rights violations because of this, but the same allegation can be made about Iraq, same allegation has been made about Syria, and Iran and Turkey historically have been inheritors of empires which have controlled the same territory. So, this is millennia old rivalry between the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire and the Empire of Istanbul, Constantinople. So, all these historical memories of past conflicts are there, but then there are realities of present day where it is the politics of oil. Let us not forget that Turkey imports almost 98% of its gas and 90% of its oil. So, it cannot look down on neighbors next door which have been oil producing. So, Turkey's ambitions, Erdogan's dangerous drive for power is also related somewhere to energy security of its own. This leads us to another geopolitical dimension in recent past. Very recently, there has been a discovery of 1.7 trillion tons of oil underwater, exclusive economic zone in the sea of Greece and Turkey. Now, this exclusive economic zone is a problem for Turkey because the United Nations Convention on Laws of Seas clearly stipulates that a country from its coast has 12 nautical miles as its sovereign territorial waters, including this 200 nautical miles is the exclusive economic zone. Now, this has been agreed upon by more than 160 members who are signatories to this convention. Turkey has not signed it. Turkey's position is this, that because if it concedes to the point of 200 miles exclusive economic zone, it would have no exclusive economic zone of its own, although it has more than 4,500 kilometers of the coastline. That is because some of the Greek islands would be very close to Turkish mainland, Cyprus would be very close to mainland, and it would be logged in front of its own gate. Now, these gas and petrol reserves which have been discovered, confirmed under sea, are tempting Turkey to make a bid, gamble, that it says, no, we don't accept the United Nations Convention on Laws of Seas, we do not concede the exclusive economic zone, we believe in a median line, and this median line would deny Greece its control of the oil. Now, this oil and gas, Turkey has signed recently an agreement with Libya, quite far off, but if you go to the continent, look at the map and see what the continental shelf is. Continental shelf is supposed to be the piece of mainland which slopes and then drops suddenly to the seabed. So, there are different interpretations, but in this particular region, even the continental shelf concept is not very easy to implement, because if you concede that point, then Turkey could claim underwater reserves of gas and oil almost all the way reaching to Libya on the tip or other extremity of Africa, Maghreb. Now, it has signed an agreement with Libya. It has tried to draw Egypt into its fold in this thing. So, this is an assertion of Turkey's role in North African continent, where it could say that partly due to Islamic Brotherhood, partly due to the shared interest in gas and oil, let's deny the access to these resources to the Western powers, to colonial powers, to multinational companies, and it could be an ideological claim which could be sustained by Turkey. Not anybody would concede this, anybody else, because this seems to give Turkey an access to very powerful resources. Now, one other aspect of Turkey should be mentioned. Turkey has managed its relationship with a erstwhile superpower, some would say even a present superpower, but enfeebled superpower, that is Russia. When last year there was a conflict which exploded between Armenia and Azerbaijan, Turkey sided on Islamic Brotherhood claims with Azerbaijan. Armenia, with largely Christian population, was being protected by Russia, but when it came to making a military intervention there to keep Turks out, or to let Armenians keep control of Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, which was of the Azerbaijanis within Armenia, Russia, apparently to many people, blinked first, because it was worried. Another country with whom Turkey's border shares is Georgia. Now, whether it is Georgia, whether it is Armenia, whether it is Azerbaijan, Russia realizes that in the Caucasus, where the Muslim population there is in Dagestan, etc., Chechnya, it probably is not desirable to irritate Turkey very much, but use Turkey to control the Muslim population in this area from adopting extremism, terrorism, and follow a moderate path. Look at Turkey, be more oriented towards modernization, etc. So, if you look at this, Turkey so far has played its cards very well. It has laid claims to resources which are up for grabs. It has been in different theaters and different civil war situations, from Syria to Iraq to Armenia and Azerbaijan, where it has flexed its muscles, not directly intervened, but then again, there is a relationship not only with Russia. It has managed somehow or other. A Russian plane was shot down once. It did not lead to any dispute. We come to the other superpower, the United States of America. Turkey continues to be a member of NATO, but it buys, despite US sanctions, S-400 missiles from Russia and says it will buy it again. It sends its warships on naval exercises in the disputed waters between Greece and Cyprus, and the Americans make token gestures to stop it, but can't do much about it. This shows that Turkey has managed to take on both superpowers, and when there is a conflict of interest of Turkey's own national interest, it is not prepared to make a compromise. This probably explains to a large extent the residual charisma and success of authoritarian Erdogan, who has tried to reintroduce hijab, who's introduced scarves to be worn as compulsory. There are even the Nobel Prize winning novelist from Turkey, Orhan Pamuk, skates on thin ice when he makes a comment on contemporary Istanbul, contemporary Turkey. And the point remains that Turkey also is sitting on two extreme climatic crises. Towards the east, Lake Van is drying up. The biodiversity is almost disappearing. Quite ironically, on the other extremity, on the western tip of Turkey, beautiful, but floods are there and more than 50 people have lost their lives within days. So these two contradictory impacts of global warming are something which Turkey exemplifies, but can it have time to focus on this when it is worried about multi-ethnic nation being kept peaceful, practical solution to be found for Kurds, manage its relationship with all its neighbors, none of them intrinsically friendly, with all there is a cause of conflict, but can that be managed peacefully is something which will be a major issue in international affairs in years to come. When we look at the map of Africa, something very interesting becomes apparent. We have Ethiopia located as the most prominent country in the Horn of Africa. It is the second most populous country in Africa, but that's about all it can say to recommend itself. It doesn't command great natural resources, except one, we shall come to that in a minute, which many people did not consider as a natural resource till very recently. Ethiopia has a very interesting claim. Many scientists believe that it was here when the Homo sapiens, our ancestor, emerged, descended from the trees, started walking on 2 feet instead of 4, had a more interesting thumb to forge weapons, more complicated weapons, had a larger cranial cavity to accommodate a larger brain, could think more, could arrange things faster and dominate the rest of the animal kingdom. So there is a very interesting slogan as you enter the Addis Ababa airport. It said, "Welcome to the beginning." This is where your story of the Homo sapiens and the human race started. But this is for emotional tourism promotion reasons. Otherwise, Ethiopia has had a long history, a checkered history, and it has imbibed diverse influences. It claims that it never became a colony, it always remained independent, and the Emperor Haile Selassie could claim that he was the descendant of the longest ruling family anywhere in the world, thousands of years. But the fact remains that at one time, Ethiopia was under Christian influence from the Roman Empire times. Even in more contemporary times in 20th century, it fell under the influence of Italians. So there is a segment of population which is Christian, but majority of the population is adherents of Islam. So there is this animist tribals, Islamic and Christianities in a confluence here. There are old artifacts, but the development of the country in terms of infrastructure is very poor. Only the cities have some kind of a development. The ruling elite, even in the imperial times of Haile Selassie, did not bother too much about the common people, and actually it had the blight of slavery, which was only abolished after the First World War. Under the Italian pressure, Haile Selassie had to abolish it. But all that seems to be very distant past, and you don't have to burden yourself with that kind of a history lesson about contemporary Ethiopia. But what you can't forget is that after Haile Selassie was ousted, the person who accomplished the coup d'etat was an army officer influenced by Marxist ideas and the then Soviet Russia. And he tried to mold the country according to the communist model. It was an unpopular tyrannical dictatorship. It ruined the country's economy, what little there was. And he, after a few years, was replaced by another coup d'etat, milder than him, but still inspired by the communist ideology. So this was the period when Ethiopia became, if not a client state of Soviet Union, thought that it could survive and develop itself with Soviet aid. Unfortunately, when all these coups were taking place in Ethiopia, the world was also changing. Mikhail Gorbachev has decided to follow the path of perestroika and glasnost. He was not interested in committing Soviet money, Soviet forces in distant land. He was more interested in reorganizing Russia itself. And he was, of course, he had singed his fingers in Afghanistan, the Russians. So Ethiopia lost out on this. And actually the Ethiopians have been constantly trying to find an identity for themselves, find a political system which works, find stability and peace and pursue prosperity ever since. So in the 1990s, this turmoil continued, but again like Russia, where Putin took over as an autocratic ruler, in Ethiopia, also after this turmoil, period of elected representative forming a government came. But the conflict between different tribal communities, it is a very odd mixture. You have, at one time they had Eritrea as a part of Ethiopia, then they have Tigray, then they have Umra, then they have Afra, then they have Somalis, then they have the Sudanese. So you look at the mix of tribals, power sharing in a federal democratic structure becomes very difficult. We fast forward a little and come to contemporary times, which is most relevant for us. Abiy Ahmed, the present Prime Minister, was awarded a Nobel Prize in the very first year of his term of office, because he claimed, and the world believed, he had brought peace and opened the way for reconciliation with the Eritreans who were separated, and the peace was more or less established with that. But unfortunately, soon after that, there was turmoil because Tigrayans, the people of Tigray, the region which borders Eritrea, had enjoyed political dominance for almost 30 years. But then when Abiy Ahmed became the Prime Minister, he ousted them. But strangely, not his own people, the Umras, were given the dominant positions. He tried to strike a balance, not very successfully. He tried to make democracy work, have an economic model which would bring some development. It did not happen. There was almost a constant rebellion in Tigray, which took very bad explosive form 2 years back. The Tigrayans wanted an election. Abiy Ahmed wanted to postpone it. He said Corona crisis is there. Tigrayans thought that he was postponing the crisis to perpetuate his autocratic authoritarian rule. They went ahead with their elections, which Abiy Ahmed and the central government thought was an act of rebellion, which was an act of sedition, and central army was sent to discipline the Tigrayans. In the beginning there was some caution, but then soon it was full-fledged war. Great atrocities were committed on the Tigrayan people, and the Tigrayan people resorted to guerrilla warfare. Although their capital Mekelle fell in the first flush of advance of the Ethiopian forces, soon, more than a few months later, the Tigrayans reclaimed their capital and they started pushing back the federal central army. Now, today the state is such that Tigrayans are in control of Mekelle. Abiy Ahmed realizes that he cannot subdue them by force. He has offered olive branches which they refuse to accept. They don't take his olive branches very seriously. They don't think he's credible. The world, including the United Nations observers, believe that great violations, human rights violations, have been committed by both sides, but largely by the central government, who sponsored them, gave directions to indulge in war crimes, to break the will of the Tigrayan people, which did not succeed. Today, a few days back, Abiy Ahmed has been forced to make an appeal that all able-bodied Ethiopians should take up arms, form a militia and fight the Tigrayans, which is an admission of the fact that he doesn't think that the Ethiopian army can do it. What is even more strange is that the community which he represents, the Umra and the other tribal group, has also, who have no love lost for the Tigrayans, have picked up arms, formed a militia and are fighting against the Ethiopian army, having a common cause with the Tigrayans. Now, this is not a good sign for the Ethiopian central government, because it indicates that the people in different parts of the federation are rising in revolt against the incompetence and unsuccessful policies of Abiy. His communications skills are no longer enough to see him through. That's one part. How has this come to this sorry pass? Partly because of overambition. Abiy Ahmed declared that he was building a grand Renaissance dam, and this is where we come to the only resource which Ethiopia commands, which is the water resource. it is called the tower of water in Africa. Now, if water is the most scarce resource in coming years, more very precious than the oil, then of course Ethiopia would play a dominant role in this part of Africa. But does it have the resources to build the Grand Renaissance Dam? Does it have the resources to maintain it properly? Can it ensure that the dam alone, a symbol, majestic symbol of Ethiopia's modernization and power potential in future, will transform either through irrigation or hydroelectric power generation the whole region? Already there are conflicts. Sudan are against it, Egyptians are against it. There are old treaty arrangements done under colonial times which are no longer relevant for either party at present time, but this is another conflict brewing. So Ethiopians are more or less isolated at the moment. They are fighting almost a civil war in several fronts, Tigray being the most important one. But we never know how many other parts will rebel against Abiy, how Abiy will cope with it, how the international community will cope with it. Of course, the sanctions can be imposed on Ethiopia, make the plight of the average Ethiopian even worse, but will it have any effect on a person who's, despite his Western education, despite his Nobel Peace Prize, is no less dictatorial, authoritarian? And what happens if Ethiopia disintegrates or if the civil war spills over in the neighboring countries? We should not forget the Chinese already have a base in Djibouti. Somali pirates are a law unto themselves. In Mogadishu, there are acts of terrorism which are fueled by those committed to Al-Shabaab. The corruption and the low morale of the armed forces and higher echelons of bureaucracy is quite transparent. If this happens, can it be that the vacuum will be filled by China? And what impact it will have on the rest of the world? Most importantly, on Indian interests. The Indians have recently, according to news, acquired a naval base in Mauritius. Indians insist that it is not a naval base, it is just to guard these waters for free communication on high seas for commercial trade reasons. But the fact remains, the India's own energy security, India's maritime trade depends on Suez Canal along the Red Sea and the Eastern African coast. And India cannot remain indifferent. Otherwise, the situation will come where India would paint itself into a tight corner and be reduced to the status of bystander. Think about it. Serious challenge, not only for Africa, spillover effect of the civil war in the rest of Africa, and impact on environmental crisis of the high Grand Renaissance Dam and piracy in this region, and the ethnic strife elsewhere, and Islamic terrorism. All these are a dangerous, potent brew about to explode in Ethiopia. One hopes they don't, but it's a very volatile mix. This is all we have for you this week. We have left enough food for thought. Think about Turkey, think about Ethiopia, compare and contrast the situations. Would you call any one of them as a regional power, a middle power, an emerging power, a resurgent power, or in case of Ethiopia, an ambitious country on the verge of failure, on the verge of disintegration, and a case which might, like quicksand, draw others into it when it goes down?